For 70 years, Canada has played the role of the global nice guy. We're the land of peacekeepers, the polite neighbor to the north, and the world's most vocal advocate for nuclear non-proliferation. But beneath this carefully cultivated image lies a darker, more complex reality. For decades, we have outsourced our very survival to the United States, huddling under a nuclear umbrella that we now realize is beginning to shred. As American foreign policy shifts toward isolationism and the rhetoric from Washington grows increasingly unpredictable, Canada faces a terrifying choice. Do we continue to trust a protector that might not be there when the frost sets in? Or do we finally do the unthinkable? Do we build the bomb?
Our country, our world, is changing at an accelerating pace, faster and faster. It may feel disconnected, like hurtling through a maelstrom, but when you peel back the layers, unpack the pieces, you start to see the Canadian connections.
This isn't a paranoid fantasy. It's a conversation happening right now in the highest halls of military strategy. Our former chief of the Defence Staff, Wayne Eyre, recently stated that Canada will never have true strategic independence absent our own nuclear deterrent. In a world where the doomsday clock is at 85 seconds to midnight, the closest it has ever been, the rules we thought kept us safe are being rewritten by those with the biggest guns. To understand where we are going, we have to look at the secrets we've kept about where we've been. We have analyzed declassified transcripts, the near-miss nuclear programs of our allies, and the broken state of the American industrial complex to see if Canada is actually capable of defending itself alone. The story of Canada's nuclear identity doesn't begin in a laboratory. It begins in the permafrost of the Northwest Territories. In 1930, a discovery was made at Echo Bay that would change the course of human history: pitchblende, a dark, heavy ore that was a primary source of radium and uranium. By 1942, a private Canadian company, El Dorado, secured a contract with the United States military to supply the material for the Manhattan Project. Canada wasn't just a witness to the birth of the atomic bomb, we were the gas station for it. We provided the fuel that leveled Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But the cost of this contribution was hidden from the very people who carried it. The Satu-Go-Tine Dene of Dayline were hired as laborers to haul 100-pound sacks of radioactive concentrate on their backs. They were never warned of the dangers. They slept on the sacks. Their children played near the ore piles. The Canadian government had known about the risks of radiation for years, yet the Dene were treated as expendable coolies for the sake of the Allied war effort. Today, Dayline is known as the Village of Widows. An entire generation of men was wiped out by cancers that the government spent decades trying to claim were unrelated to the 1.7 million tons of radioactive waste dumped into Great Bear Lake. This was the first betrayal. It established a pattern that would define our nuclear history: the prioritization of national interests and alliance obligations over the lives and sovereignty of our own people. As the Second World War transitioned into the Cold War, Canada found itself in a geographic nightmare. We were the filling in the sandwich between the United States and the Soviet Union. Any nuclear exchange between the superpowers would happen over our heads, and our soil would be the graveyard for intercepted bombers. This led to the era of incineration without representation. We realized that we were a primary target, yet we had no say in the finger that might pull the trigger. This tension exploded into a political crisis in the early 1960s. The Diefenbaker government was paralyzed. We had purchased the Beaumark missile system and Voodoo interceptors from the Americans, but there was one problem. They were useless without nuclear warheads. Diefenbaker's cabinet split down the middle. Some argued that accepting nukes would destroy our role as a peaceful mediator. Others, like Defense Minister Douglas Harkness, argued it was unreasonable to have the gun but no bullets. The Americans, led by a frustrated Kennedy administration, viewed our hesitation as a hole in the Continental Shield. The 1963 election was fought almost entirely on this nuclear question. Lester B. Pearson's Liberals won by promising to fulfill our NATO and NORAD obligations. By 1964, Canada had become a nuclear-armed nation in everything but name. Under a dual-key arrangement, we hosted hundreds of American-owned warheads on Canadian soil, from Bomark missiles in North Bay to tactical bombs for our starfighters in West Germany. Our pilots were trained for first strike missions. We were part of the priesthood of nuclear warfighting, even as we told the world we were a non-nuclear state. It was Pierre Elliott Trudeau who began the long, quiet walk back from the brink. Starting in the late 1960s, he systematically began to divest Canada of its nuclear role. He saw that relying on the American umbrella made us a target, not a sovereign state. He famously proposed a strategy of suffocation at the United Nations, seeking to halt the arms race by cutting off the technical inputs. By 1984, the last nuclear-tipped Genie missiles were removed from Canadian soil without fanfare. We became the first nation in the world with the capacity to produce nuclear weapons that chose to give them up. But did we actually give up the capability? This is where the concept of nuclear latency comes in. While we were returning warheads to the Americans, we were perfecting the CANDU reactor. The CANDU is a masterpiece of engineering, but it's also a dual-use engine. Unlike American light water reactors, the CANDU can be refueled while it's running. It uses natural uranium, meaning we don't need expensive enrichment facilities to keep it going. Most importantly, it produces plutonium as a byproduct, more plutonium per unit of energy than almost any other design. In 1974, India used a Canadian-designed Cirrus reactor to produce the material for its first nuclear test. It was a wake-up call for the world and a moment of deep embarrassment for Ottawa. It proved that the technology we were exporting for peaceful purposes was a blueprint for the bomb. Strategists look at countries like Sweden and Spain, which spent years building the infrastructure for nuclear weapons in secret, only to stop at the very last second. Sweden had the jets and the reactor designs. Spain had the fissile material. Canada has both. We have the world's largest commercial uranium refinery in Blind River and a mature civilian nuclear sector. We are, quite literally, one phone call away from a weapon. So why haven't we made that call? Until recently, the answer was simple. The American umbrella worked. As long as the US was committed to NATO and global stability, Canada could afford the luxury of being a non-nuclear power. We gained the soft power of a peacekeeper while enjoying the hard protection of the world's largest arsenal. It was the ultimate geopolitical free ride. But that era is ending. The United States is no longer the predictable protector it once was. We are seeing a shift toward a world of spheres of influence, where the size of the gun decides the rules, and treaties like the New START are allowed to expire without a replacement. The U.S. industrial complex is currently described as largely broken, unable to win a new arms race even if it wanted to. If the American umbrella continues to crack, Canada is left exposed in the Arctic, where Russia is aggressively modernizing its hypersonic capabilities and ignoring international boundaries. The debate is no longer just bomb versus no bomb. It is about sovereignty. Can we remain a sovereign nation if we cannot defend our own borders? If the US threatens annexation or simply decides that defending Canada is too expensive, what is our recourse? Our current defense minister insists that international treaties preclude us from ever seeking nuclear arms, but treaties only matter if they are enforced. In a world where might makes right, pretending nuclear weapons don't matter is the most dangerous choice we can make. However, building a physical warhead might actually make us a bigger target. A small Canadian arsenal could invite a preemptive strike from an adversary before our deterrent is fully operational. It would trigger massive international sanctions and fundamentally change the nature of our society, draining billions from healthcare and housing to feed a military-industrial machine. There is a middle path, a ghost arsenal strategy. Canada doesn't need to build a bomb today, it needs to master the cycle. By investing in dual-use infrastructure, like nuclear-powered submarines and satellite launch technology, we can achieve the deterrent effect of a nuclear state without ever breaking a treaty. The world needs to know that we could have a weapon by morning if we had to. This is the strategy of the impregnable middle,
We leverage our high-end university systems, our economic attractiveness, and our technical latency to become a power that is too costly to invade and too vital to ignore.
We don't need a warhead to be a superpower. We need the infrastructure of independence. For too long, we have lived on borrowed time and borrowed security. The nice guy of the North needs to realize that niceness is not a military strategy. As the world moves closer to midnight, our survival depends on our ability to stand alone. We must stop being a client state of an fading empire and start being the master of our own northern destiny. We may not want the bomb, but we must ensure that we are never again in a position where we are forced to ask for permission to survive.